Hello, everyone. Tonight, we're stepping into a life where your bed is a patch of dirt, your neighbors might eat you, and dinner is something you have to personally stab first. From boiling bitter roots, until they're only slightly poisonous, to chasing an animal for 6 hours just to have a lion take it at the finish line, to sleeping so close to the fire that you wake up smelling like smoked meat, and realizing that's a problem, because other things like smoked meat too. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you enjoy wandering into the past with me, where the survival rate is, politely speaking, optimistic. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's nice to imagine our little campfire stretching across time zones. Now, dim the lights. Wrap your hands around something warm. Let the sound of the wind in your room pretend it's moving through tall grass. And let's follow the trail back to a life you probably wouldn't last a week in. Let me tell you about the person you could have been. The one who was born not into a warm hospital room, but into a drafty patch of grass and mud, somewhere between a damp riverbank and a wind that smelled faintly of smoke and animal dung. No lullabies piped from a phone, no pastel wallpaper with clouds, just the steady rattle of wind through reeds and the occasional cough from a relative chewing on half-dried meat. Your mother. She's not reclining in a bed. She's squatting. Because gravity and urgency are cheaper than midwives. You arrive into a world that does not care if you are full of potential. The only thing that matters is that you're breathing, screaming, and not immediately claimed by cold, hunger, or the wrong predator at the wrong time. If you're lucky, you're wrapped in softened animal hide, tucked against someone's chest, where your smell will mingle with theirs, so you don't seem like an abandoned snack to passing carnivores. If you're unlucky, well, let's not get attached. Infant mortality is not a statistic here. It's a given. Your first cradle, the bend of your mother's arm, or a shallow depression in the earth lined with grass, far from anything that might step on you. No toys, no mobiles. The most stimulating object in your field of vision is a flake of flint glinting in the firelight or the slow shadow of a hand waving away flies. While other modern infants have playlists for brain development, your brain develops to the sound of someone cracking bones open for marrow. Here's the bit people tend to skip in romantic cave painting fantasies. Every adult around you is tired. Always. That's the baseline. You're not cooed at because language is still busy inventing itself, and even if they could, they're saving their breath for something useful, like shouting at a forager who's wandered too far, or warning someone that the log by the river has too many teeth. You grow in an environment where softness is rare and accident is routine. Rain soaks the ground you're lying on, and cold seeps into your bones before you even know what bones are. Some nights, the group huddles so close together you can't tell where your limbs end and someone else's begin. The only heating system is the communal fire, which is both your life insurance and the single biggest hazard if you happen to roll in the wrong direction. And yet, you're not precious. The group loves you in the way a group loves the future of its food supply chain, with investment, not indulgence. You are one mouth now, but you could be 2 hands in 10 years, and in a world where every hand counts, that's your main selling point. And as you lie there, blinking at a sky that feels far too big, you don't know that half of the skills you'll need to survive will be learned before you even lose your milk teeth. You don't know that the first thing you'll have to master isn't walking, it's staying alive long enough to walk. Which, incidentally, means you'll be moving into topic 2 a lot sooner than you think. Because childhood here doesn't come with a grace period. By the time you can stand without toppling over like an undercooked deer leg, you've already learned that the world has teeth. Some of them belong to animals, some belong to people, and some belong to plants, with spines sharp enough to open skin faster than a flint blade. Childhood here isn't a protected bubble, it's a dress rehearsal for the full-time performance of staying alive. You don't toddle across soft carpet. You stagger across uneven ground littered with bones, discarded nutshells, and the occasional spearhead someone forgot to pick up. The air smells of smoke, wet earth, and the faint tang of something that died a little too far from camp. If you wander off, no one chases you immediately. They shout, and you're expected to understand that if you can't see the fire, you might not see tomorrow. Toys are a luxury item, and by toys, I mean whatever you find that doesn't cut, poison, or eat you. A rounded stone, a stick that vaguely resembles an antelope leg, a bit of animal sinew you've been chewing on for 2 days because it tastes faintly of meat and feels like victory. Every game is survival training in disguise, throwing stones at tree trunks for accuracy, chasing smaller kids to practice persistence hunting, learning how to read the mood of adults because they might decide you're in the way. Your babysitters are older children, which is to say they're barely less likely to get you killed than you are. They drag you along to forage for berries, which is a crash course in edible botany and in watching someone retch dramatically when they get the wrong plant. You learn quickly, bright red isn't always good, and some leaves bite back. Predators are an ever-present hazard. Hyenas don't care that you're just a child. To them, you're a snack with poor motor skills. So the older ones drill the basics into you. Stay in groups, never run in a straight line, and always know which adult is carrying the spear. The human brain might be our species' greatest weapon, but your own brain at this stage is mostly devoted to remembering which hole you saw that snake slither into. And even when predators aren't a problem, the environment will happily take over the job. Rivers look inviting until the current drags you under. Open grasslands seem peaceful until the sun decides to cook you from the inside out. Fall from a rock ledge and there's no clinic, no x-ray, no gentle-voiced nurse. There's just pain, a limp, and the uncomfortable possibility that you're now slowing down the group. It's not all doom and gloom, though you do survive, mostly because the adults are invested in keeping their gene pool afloat. They teach you without speeches, without handouts, and definitely without the phrase learning objectives. You learn by copying, by failing, and by being laughed at when you get it wrong. And you will get it wrong repeatedly. By the time your milk teeth loosen, you're already a functioning, if undersized member of the team. You can carry wood, scare birds off drying meat, and spot a rabbit hole before someone else steps in it. And that's the point. Here, childhood isn't about preparation for life. It is life. And just when you think you've finally figured out how to dodge snakes and avoid drowning, they hand you your next challenge, one that involves tools sharp enough to end you faster than any predator. By the time you've grown into something vaguely resembling a small human rather than a soft, drooling liability, the apprenticeship begins. There are no graduation ceremonies, no first day of school photos, just someone shoving a stick into your hand and pointing at something you might need to kill. Early skill training is as romantic as people like to imagine when they watch documentaries with slow drums and sunset shots. Except here it smells like blood, and you're the one expected to make it spill. You don't start with the big game no one trusts, a half-grown child with a spear that could punch through an aurochs but might also punch through uncle. Instead, you're sent to help set traps for small animals, rabbits, birds, sometimes fish. You learn how to bait a snare with something that smells irresistible to the animal but also, if you're careless, to predators that make the animal look like a snack. Sometimes you come back with dinner, sometimes with a mangled trap and a story that starts, "I nearly died today." Observation is the main teaching method. You crouch next to older hunters, mimicking their movements, squinting at tracks you can barely see, nodding solemnly as if the random scratches in the dirt are the obvious footprints of something worth chasing. You start to see the world in signs, a bent blade of grass, a sudden silence among birds, the pattern of droppings that tells you not just what passed through, but how long ago and in which mood. It's not all about animals, though. Plants are the difference between staying alive and decorating your grave. You learn which roots can fill your stomach, which berries will send you running for the bushes, and which leaves conceal a wound before you bleed out. Every error is paid for immediately, sometimes with nausea, sometimes with infection, and occasionally with a very solemn burial attended by people who now have one less mouth to feed. Weapons are an extension of your body, and if you're clumsy with them, you might be both the hunter and the hunted in the same afternoon. Flint knapping is an art. Tap too hard and you ruin the stone. Tap too soft and it stays useless. You make your first blade, and it's ugly, chipped in all the wrong places, but it can cut through hide, which makes you a contributor instead of just a consumer. And while you're getting the hang of all this, you're also learning the invisible rules. Who gets to lead a hunt? Who gets first claim on the kill? And how not to anger the person who controls the distribution of meat. You see, in this world, social survival and physical survival are the same thing. You can know every track, every tool, every edible plant, and still starve if you can't keep the right people on your side. You don't realize it yet, but these lessons are shaping your entire sense of reality. You're becoming someone who reads the ground like a story, the wind like a warning, and the silence like a threat. And just when you start feeling clever about it, hunger arrives, the kind that makes all skill and pride irrelevant. Because now you have to find food or watch your own body turn into the next cautionary tale. You'd think that after weeks of learning how to stalk rabbits, read tracks, and whittle a stick into something lethal, you'd be able to feed yourself. Adorable assumption. The reality is that even the best prepared prehistoric hunter spends a good portion of their life hungry. You don't plan meals here. You beg the weather, the animals, and the landscape to cooperate. And most days they don't. Your menu isn't a list you choose from. It's whatever doesn't run faster than you, hide better than you, or kill you when you try to eat it. Some days, that's fresh meat still warm from the hunt. Some days, it's a handful of berries you picked while pretending you were looking for bigger game. And some days, it's roots so bitter you chew them while convincing yourself they're good for you. Which is prehistoric, for we have no other option. There's no such thing as 3 meals a day. More like one big feast, if a hunt goes well, followed by 2 or 3 days of scraping together whatever you can find. The human body adapts. You can go without food for stretches of time, but the mental strain of not knowing when you'll eat next makes you sharper, meaner, and occasionally willing to fight a cousin over a half-chewed bone. Seasonal shifts are your worst enemy. In spring and summer, plants are generous, animals are plump, and everyone walks around with that smug we might actually survive look. But winter or dry season, suddenly, the landscape looks like it's been cleared out by someone with a grudge. Even the rabbits vanish, as if they've read the weather and decided to vacation elsewhere. The group adapts by moving, sometimes hundreds of kilometers, chasing migrating herds or shifting to areas where foraging still yields enough calories to keep bones from showing through skin. Every relocation is a gamble. Too early, and you arrive before resources peak. Too late, and another group has already stripped the place bare. Hunting itself is high risk, low guarantee. A single misstep, wind carrying your scent, a loose rock underfoot, and you can spend an entire day chasing an animal only to watch it disappear over the horizon, leaving you with nothing but sore legs and a bruised ego. And the calorie math is brutal. You can burn more energy hunting than you gain from eating what you catch, which means sometimes the smartest hunt is scavenging from predators who did the hard work first, assuming you can chase them off without becoming the next course. Even in good times, meat isn't your primary calorie source. Plants, nuts, seeds, and tubers make up the bulk of what keeps you alive. But these come with their own challenges. They're seasonal, scattered, and sometimes toxic if prepared wrong. The difference between edible and poisonous can be the number of hours you roast something, the part of the plant you eat, or whether you remembered to leach the bitterness out with water. Forget, and the group gets a stomach-turning reminder of why knowledge matters more than bravery. So you live in a constant state of negotiation with the land. Some days it rewards you, some days it laughs at you, and some days it reminds you that you're not the top of the food chain. You're just another hungry animal trying to make it to the next sunrise. And it's in those hungry stretches that your tools stop feeling like symbols of skill and start feeling like the only thing between you and collapse. By now you've learned that hunger doesn't negotiate. It either forces you to adapt or makes you the kind of tragic anecdote elders tell by the fire. And adaptation, in your case, comes in the form of tools. Not the sleek, shiny kind in a hardware store, but lumps of stone, lengths of wood, and the occasional bone that's been bullied into usefulness. There's a myth that prehistoric tools were crude. That's a modern person's arrogance talking, the kind that assumes anything not made in a factory is primitive. Here, your survival depends on the geometry of a flint edge, the flexibility of a spear shaft, and your ability to maintain both without snapping them in frustration. Flint knapping isn't just banging rocks together until something sharp happens. It's an art of precision, angle, force, and an eye for the stone's hidden fractures. Get it wrong, and you've turned a valuable chunk of flint into nothing more than a paperweight for a world that doesn't have paper. Your first weapons are probably embarrassing. A spear point so uneven it wobbles in the air like it's drunk. A stone knife that can sort of cut meat, but only if the meat is already halfway falling apart. But the moment you manage to craft something that can slice through hide or punch into flesh without shattering, you feel like you've been given a superpower. That tool isn't just a thing you made. It's the difference between you eating tonight and you listening to your stomach echo in the dark. Weapons aren't just for hunting though, they're for defending yourself against predators and, occasionally, other people. That means your toolkit is never complete. You'll carry a stabbing weapon for close range, a throwing spear for distance, and a cutting tool for processing whatever unfortunate creature you've managed to bring down. And every single one of them needs maintenance, a chipped edge resharpened, a cracked shaft replaced, sinew bindings retied, before they fail at exactly the wrong moment. The raw materials aren't infinite, either. Flint, obsidian, or high-quality stone can be rare depending on where your group is moving. So part of your survival skill is knowing where to find them and how to carry spares without weighing yourself down. Break a spear point in the middle of a hunt without a replacement ready, and congratulations, you've just turned into a spectator in a game you can't afford to lose. And then there's fire-hardened wood, the prehistoric equivalent of performance enhancement. Heat treat a spear tip and it gains the rigidity to pierce thicker hides. But do it wrong, and you've just burned away hours of work. The line between genius and ruin is one unguarded moment with a too hot ember. You start to notice that the people with the best tools, the most balanced spears, the sharpest blades, are the ones who eat more regularly and get chosen for the more promising hunts. Tools are status. Tools are security. And in a world where your stomach doesn't care about fairness, tools are power. But the thing about power is that it's only as useful as your ability to use it. Which is why, as soon as you've made something sharp enough to matter, the elders take you out to the open ground, point to a set of faint impressions in the dirt, and tell you to follow them. Welcome to the far more delicate craft of reading the land, because the sharpest blade means nothing if you can't find something worth stabbing. This is where you learn the real truth. The hunt doesn't start when you throw the spear, it starts hours, sometimes days, before you even see the animal. You've been handed a weapon, sure, but now you're staring at the ground like it's a page in a book you can't read yet. And someone older, quieter, and much more annoyed with your existence is telling you, look, it's right there. At first, all you see is dirt, dirt with some lines in it, dirt with a dent, dirt with a different dent. Then your eyes start to adjust. Those lines become a split hoof mark. That dent is where a knee hit the ground. Those disturbed leaves. The wind didn't do that. Something heavy moved through here, and you can tell how long ago by how crisp the edges are. Congratulations, you're reading footprints the way most people read headlines. But it's not just the ground. Tracking is a full body sense. The angle of a blade of grass, the way a bird suddenly stops calling, the smell of musk in the air, all of it adds up to a map in your head. You'll learn that a herd's path curves toward water, that predators prefer to approach from downwind, that an animal's droppings aren't just there but full of information, what it ate, how recently, and how far ahead it might be now. This isn't leisurely strolling and squinting at mud. It's hours of moving silently, keeping the sun's position in mind, and remembering where you've seen this pattern before. Sometimes the trail vanishes, and you have to read the land for indirect signs, a snapped twig here, an unusual stillness there, until the story picks up again. And every moment you're doing this, you're burning calories, which means the pressure is constant. Find it before your own body starts eating itself. You also start learning the social side of tracking. You don't announce every clue you find. That's how you prove you're not dead weight. But you also don't pretend you saw what you didn't. Misreading a track can waste an entire day, and no one forgives the person who made them miss a kill. It's a balance. Contribute enough to be valuable, not so much that you're expected to lead before you're ready. Sometimes tracking leads you to the animal. Sometimes it leads you straight into the territory of something bigger, hungrier, and far less interested in running away. Which is why the people teaching you keep scanning the edges of the trail. They're not just looking for your prey. They're making sure you're not about to become prey yourself. Over time, the land stops looking random. You start to recognize paths like you recognize faces. You can tell when the wind has shifted enough to give you away. You learn to listen for what isn't there, the silence that drops over a clearing when every living thing decides to stop breathing for a moment. And just when you think you're getting the hang of it, you hit your first real test, following a trail all the way to the animal, and realizing the only thing between you and it is your ability to close the distance without becoming a cautionary tale in someone else's training session. Because here's the catch, finding something is one thing, getting close enough to kill it without it killing you back, that's an entirely different skill set. You've tracked it for hours, maybe days. The prints have led you over rocks, through waist-high grass, across a stream that numbed your legs and reminded you that yes, hypothermia is a thing even without snow. And there it is, the animal you've been chasing, larger than you remembered, closer than feels safe, looking directly at you in a way that makes you reconsider whether hunger is really that bad. Dangerous hunts aren't rare here, they're the default. Any animal worth eating has teeth, horns, hooves, or sheer mass that can turn a hunter into a smear on the ground. The first rule you learn: respect the fact that you're not a predator in the sense lions are predators. You're a gambler with a sharp stick, betting that your coordination, your friends, and your timing will beat whatever biology designed your dinner. The process isn't elegant. You and the others fan out, moving slow, talking low. You aim to box it in, drive it toward an ambush, or push it into terrain that works in your favor: mud, a narrow pass, a cliff edge. The animal, however, has no intention of cooperating. It bolts, swerves, or charges, and in the chaos, all those careful formations turn into a sprint for your life. Close-range kills are where the real danger sits. You're jabbing at a moving target that can weigh several hundred kilos, knowing that if you miss or the spear shaft splinters, you've just volunteered to be the soft thing standing directly in its path. Broken bones, goring wounds, crushed chests, these aren't accidents here, they're occupational hazards. It's not just the big game either. Wild boar can gut a person in seconds. A cornered antelope can shatter a leg with one kick. Even birds, the kind you imagined roasted over the fire, can slash a face open with their claws if you grab wrong. The line between food and threat is thin enough to trip over. And all the while, you're aware that you're not hunting in a vacuum. Predators notice the same signs you do. Lions, hyenas, and wolves may have been following the herd, or you, the entire time. More than one hunter has bled out, not from the prey's retaliation, but from a lion deciding to take advantage of the chaos. That's why someone always watches the edges of the hunt, scanning for the second set of eyes in the grass. When the kill finally comes, it's not the clean cinematic moment you've been sold by paintings and films. It's messy, it's loud, it smells of fear and sweat and blood, and your relief is matched by the adrenaline spike of still being alive. You work fast, skinning, gutting, hauling, because the sound of death carries. And in this world, sound is an open invitation for trouble. And as you sling meat onto your back, knowing every kilo adds to the strain of the return trip, you realize that the real test isn't over. Now you have to get the prize back to camp without losing it to predators, weather, or the sudden betrayal of your own body. And in that long walk home, with the heat pounding your skull and the smell of fresh kill trailing behind you like a dinner bell, you start thinking about the other danger no one mentions until it's too late. You're not the only predator out here, and some of them walk on two legs. You've got the kill on your back, still warm, still dripping, and you're thinking, we did it. Which is exactly the moment nature likes to remind you it's not finished with you yet. Out here, you're never the only thing hunting. You're just one of many creatures eyeing the same meal, and not all of them are polite enough to wait until you're done chewing. The most obvious competition comes with claws, teeth, and a confidence that says, I could take you. Lions, hyenas, leopards, they're not just out here chasing their own prey. They're perfectly happy to take yours, and they've perfected the art of showing up right after the hard work is done. A fresh kill bleeds scent into the air, carrying 4 kilometers, and every carnivore within range gets the invitation. Sometimes they approach slow, testing your nerve. Sometimes they come in at full charge, betting that you'll drop the meat and run. And it's not just the big names you need to worry about. Packs of wild dogs can strip a carcass to bone in minutes, and they'll do it right in front of you. Crocodiles don't care if you're just rinsing your hands at the river after the hunt. They've been doing their own version of fresh food delivery for millions of years. Even smaller predators, jackals, large birds of prey, will take what they can if you leave it unattended for a heartbeat. You don't just fight predators for food, you fight them for safety. Carrying meat makes you a moving target. That smell on your hands, on your clothes, in the air around you, it's a trail that says, follow me if you're hungry, which means you're walking home with one eye forward, one eye behind, and you're gripped tight on whatever weapon you didn't break during the hunt. And then there's the other kind of predator, the human kind. Other groups hunt the same herds, forage the same plants, drink from the same rivers, Most of the time, you keep your distance, a polite, invisible border neither side crosses without cause. But scarcity changes the rules. In a lean season, or after a failed hunt, some bands decide it's easier to take what you've gathered than to risk going home empty-handed. That's when you see spears raised, voices sharp, and the air turn tense enough to make you wish you'd carried less meat and more friends. You learn quickly that competition isn't always a fight. Sometimes it's a race to the migration paths, to the watering holes, to the berry patch before the birds strip it bare. And sometimes it's about intimidation, showing enough strength to make another group think twice. Even if you're just bluffing because your quiver is down to one usable arrow. Either way, you carry this truth home with you. You're not the apex predator here. You're part of a shifting food web, and on any given day, you might be the spider or the fly. The only way to tip the odds in your favor is to keep moving, keep watching, and never assume the ground you're standing on or the meat you're carrying is truly yours. And that constant movement brings you to the next reality of your life. You don't own a home, just a series of temporary shelters that disappear as quickly as they're built. Home, for you, isn't a fixed place. It's wherever the food currently is, and when the food moves, so do you. There's no real estate here, no forever house, no sentimental attachment to a view. The closest thing you have to a property portfolio is a mental map of where you've slept without being eaten. Your shelter is temporary by design. A lean-to of branches, a windbreak of piled stones, maybe a hide stretched between poles if you're feeling fancy. You build it quickly. You take it down even faster. If you're lucky, you stay in one spot for a few weeks before the resources thin out. More often, you're gone within days, dismantling camp at dawn, loading your gear onto your back, and stepping into whatever the horizon decides to throw at you. Mobility isn't a lifestyle choice, it's survival math. Animals migrate, plants, fruit, and then vanish. Water sources dry up or flood. Stay too long in one place, and you're not just out of food. You're sitting in a shrinking circle of resources, while every other living thing is doing the same calculation. The distances aren't small. You might walk 10, 20, 30 kilometers in a day, carrying tools, hides, firewood, and whatever personal possessions you can't bear to leave behind, which, let's be honest, is mostly just things that help you not die. Children walk too, at a pace set by the slowest person who can still keep up without collapsing. That means the group moves like a living organism, stretching, contracting, pausing when someone spots a track or when the heat turns the ground into a griddle. Travel isn't safe. Open ground makes you visible to predators. Rivers have to be crossed without losing your gear or your balance. Weather can turn from tolerable to punishing in an hour. Scorching sun one day, icy wind the next, all without the courtesy of warning clouds. And at the end of the day's march, you don't arrive anywhere so much as stop in a place where you can at least pretend to rest. You also learn that moving means competing for territory. That grove of nut trees you found. Another group probably found it last season. That freshwater spring. Someone else might already be there, and they might not be in the mood to share. Which is why scouts are sent ahead, not just to find the best route, but to make sure the best route doesn't lead straight into trouble. Over time, the land becomes less like a blank map and more like a living calendar. You know when the berries ripen in one valley, when the herd crosses a certain plain, when a particular river runs low enough to wade, miss the timing, and you could walk for days into an empty season, a place that once fed you now stripped bare, leaving you with the same two options: keep moving or start starving. And as your feet blister and your shoulders ache, you realize there's no real pause button here. Movement is life. Stopping too long is an invitation for hunger, disease, or someone else to take what you're sitting on. Which is why, even in camp, your role isn't rest, it's contribution. Because the moment you're stationary, the clock starts ticking toward the next departure, and you'd better be worth carrying along when it's time to go. In a prehistoric hunting band, going it alone isn't just impractical, it's an unmarked grave waiting to happen. You survive because the group survives, and the group survives because everyone plays a role. Which means you're not just living with people, you're tethered to them like organs in the same body, and if one fails, the whole thing starts shutting down. There's no fixed schedule of job titles, but everyone has something they're expected to contribute. Some hunt large game, some trap small animals or fish, some forage for edible plants, nuts, and roots, others prepare hides, maintain weapons, watch the children, or keep the fire alive. And everyone knows how to do at least a bit of everyone else's job, because a missing hunter or forager isn't an inconvenience here. It's a food shortage. It's not about fairness, it's about function. You can be liked or disliked, but as long as you're useful, you're worth the calories it takes to feed you. Stop being useful because of injury, illness, or just laziness, and the calculation changes. Prehistoric life has no HR department, but it does have a silent cost-benefit analysis running at all times. Food sharing is the glue that holds the group together. A hunter who lands a big kill doesn't just feed themselves, they feed everyone. Not out of pure generosity, social rules make sure they do. Refuse to share, and you risk being excluded from future hunts, from protection, even from the fire circle. Sharing is insurance. The meat you give away today is the meat someone else will give you when your spear comes back empty. And while modern fantasies paint hunters as exclusively male and foragers as exclusively female, reality was more flexible. Yes, physical strength played a role, but ability mattered more than stereotype. There's archaeological evidence of women buried with hunting tools, and men's remains showing wear patterns from plant processing. In small bands, versatility is survival. Of course, cooperation doesn't mean harmony. Arguments happen over food, over sleeping spots, over who gets first pick of a kill. Sometimes they're resolved with words, sometimes with a shove, sometimes by someone quietly taking their supporters and walking away. Bands split, merge, and reform constantly. There's no central government, no courts. The only law that matters is whether enough people agree with you to keep you alive. Even the act of hunting together is as much about trust as it is about skill. You need to know the person beside you won't panic and ruin the ambush, won't steal your share of the kill, won't accidentally aim their spear at you when tempers are high. And that trust isn't automatic, it's earned through seasons of showing up, pulling your weight, and proving you can be relied on when things go sideways. You might think this level of interdependence would make the group feel like a family. Sometimes it does. Other times it feels like being stuck in an endless group project where one mistake can get everyone killed. And unlike modern group projects, you can't mute anyone, you can't opt out, and you can't hide in your room, because your room is the same piece of dirt they're sleeping on. And in that claustrophobic, necessary togetherness, the stakes get clearer. The group will carry you when you're weak, but it won't carry you forever. Which is why you learn early to avoid the kind of injuries that turn you from an asset into a liability, something that's easier said than done. When every day is an obstacle course with no safety net. If you want to know how fragile your place in a prehistoric hunting band really is, all it takes is one bad fall. A twisted ankle, a deep cut, a toothache that swells your jaw until you can't chew. Any of these can turn you from a contributor into a liability, faster than you can say infection. And here, a liability isn't a metaphor. It's a mouth that consumes resources without replacing them. There are no doctors, no sterile bandages, no antibiotics. Your medical team is whoever's willing to squat next to you and see if they can stop the bleeding with moss, chew up some plant matter to pack into the wound, or heat a stone to cauterize it, while trying not to notice you're screaming loud enough to bring in scavengers. They mean well, but they're working with what they have. Knowledge passed down orally, trial and error, and the occasional "this worked on a goat once." For minor injuries, the body often heals itself, if you can keep the wound clean and avoid tearing it open again, while you limp through your daily tasks. For major injuries, survival is a roll of the dice weighted heavily toward.
No.
Infections are the real killers here. One bad cut can spiral into fever, delirium, and death within days. Without the concept of germ theory, people just know that some wounds go bad, and their solution is either poultices made from plants with antibacterial properties, effective sometimes by accident, or amputation with a sharp flint, effective if you consider dying slightly later a success. Illness is just as dangerous. Colds and fevers aren't inconveniences. They're signs your body might be about to lose the fight. Waterborne diseases, parasites, and respiratory infections travel fast in close quarters. One sick person around the fire can infect half the group before anyone realizes it's more than just fatigue. And teeth are the hidden disaster, where from chewing tough roots and gritty food means cracks, infections, and abscesses. In a world without dental care, a bad tooth can kill you as surely as a spear wound. Archaeological evidence shows abscesses in prehistoric skulls, so severe they must have caused agony. And yet the person lived with them for months, maybe years, proof of resilience, but also of how much pain was simply part of the background here. Care does happen though. People don't just abandon you at the first sign of trouble. Archaeological remains show healed fractures, suggesting others helped injured individuals survive for months, or even years after debilitating injuries. But that care has limits. If the group's survival is at risk, if food is scarce or danger is near, the calculation changes. So you learn early to watch your step, to keep your spear between you and anything with teeth, and to recognize when your body's warning you it's about to fail. Because here, the difference between injured and gone can be just a few days, and winter is coming, bringing with it the hardest test of all, surviving when the land itself seems to turn against you. If you've made it this far without breaking, burning, or rotting, congratulations, you've reached the part of the year designed to test exactly how badly you want to stay alive. Seasonal hardship isn't a surprise here. It's a recurring appointment, like taxes, but with more frostbite and fewer loopholes. In the warm months, the land feels almost generous. Plants fruit, game fattens, water flows clear. You might even have the luxury of eating until you're full. But as the seasons shift, the world quietly slams the door in your face. If you live in colder latitudes, the first real frost tells you it's about to get harder. If you're in the tropics, it's the dry season, when rivers shrank to stagnant pools and the air tastes like dust. Food is the first to vanish. Plants die back or go dormant. Animals migrate. The herds you relied on now dots on the horizon, moving toward greener pastures you may or may not be able to follow. The ones that stay are lean, wary, and harder to catch. Your diet narrows to whatever you've managed to store: dried meat, smoked fish, nuts cached in pits, roots dug up and hidden from other foragers. But these supplies are finite, and guarding them becomes a full-time job. Water changes too. In winter, you're melting snow or breaking ice to drink, each sip costing you time, fuel, and body heat. In dry seasons, you walk farther and farther to find what's left, risking fights with other groups or animals equally desperate for a drink. Every trip is a calculation. Is the water worth the risk? Usually yes, until it isn't. The cold itself is a predator. Archaeological evidence shows prehistoric clothing made from hides and furs, stitched or laced to insulate against freezing winds. But there's only so much you can do when temperatures drop, and you're sleeping in a shelter you can take down in under an hour. Fires burn through your fuel supply fast, and every trip to gather more risks, frostbite or worse. And then there's illness. Cold, hunger, and close quarters make it easy for respiratory infections to spread. Malnutrition weakens immune systems, so a cough that wouldn't matter in summer can spiral into something that takes you out entirely. In hot, dry seasons, the threats shift. Dehydration, heat stroke, and waterborne disease fill the same role, just with a different flavor of misery. Every choice gets sharper in winter or drought. Do you burn your last reserve of fat now for warmth, or try to stretch it out for the coming weeks? Do you risk the long trek to follow the herds, knowing someone might collapse along the way, or stay put and hope your traps catch enough to keep you from gnawing on leather? And yet, somehow, groups do survive, because they know the rhythms of the land. They've mapped the migration routes, the seasonal edible plants, the places where snow drifts less deeply or where a riverbed still hides a trickle of water. They have rituals for this time, not because the spirits actually make winter shorter, but because shared belief keeps the group moving. Still, hardship carves its mark into every body and mind. When the season finally turns, you don't feel triumphant. You just feel less doomed. And that fleeting relief is when you notice something else. The hunt isn't just about filling bellies anymore. It's about keeping the group's spirit intact, something the next part of your life will tie directly into ritual and belief. By now, you've learned that the hunt isn't just a practical act. It's theater. It's diplomacy with the land, a long-running negotiation with the animals, and a conversation with forces no one has ever seen but everyone insists are watching. Ritual and belief aren't extras in prehistoric life. They're woven right into the daily grind of trying not to starve. Before a big hunt, there's ceremony. It might be a chant, a dance, the painting of bodies with ochre or charcoal. Sometimes it's drawing the animal on stone walls, not as art for art's sake, but as an act of sympathetic magic, the belief that depicting the prey increases the odds of catching it. Archaeological sites from Europe to southern Africa show these patterns, not random animals, but species central to survival, rendered with deliberate care. Objects become sacred in this context. The spear you've used to make a kill might be decorated or stored differently. A necklace made from the teeth or claws of a dangerous animal isn't just jewelry. It's a portable resume that says, I faced something that could have killed me, and I walked away with this. In some cases, parts of the animal skulls, horns, hides are kept in places of significance, perhaps as offerings, perhaps as a way of honoring or controlling the spirit of the creature. The rituals aren't all about boosting luck. Some are about respect, an acknowledgement that taking life has a cost, even if you can't afford sentimentality. Among many hunter-gatherer groups in the ethnographic record, there's the idea that animals give themselves to hunters who behave properly. That means following taboos, not boasting about the kill, not wasting parts of the animal, not harming certain species at certain times. Break those rules, and it's believed the animals will withhold themselves, and hunger will follow. There's also the practical side of ritual. It binds the group together. A hunt is dangerous, exhausting, and full of risk. Starting it with shared actions and beliefs means everyone walks into danger with a common mindset. It's psychological armor. If you believe you're favored by unseen forces, you stand a little steadier when the animal turns and charges. And then there are the post-hunt rituals. The butchering itself can be ceremonial. Who cuts first? Who distributes the meat? Who gets the prized organs? Eating can be communal, with certain parts reserved for certain people. Elders, successful hunters, children. Sometimes bones are returned to a specific place, perhaps to ensure the species' return, or to avoid angering whatever spirit is thought to own them. The funny part is that while modern minds might see these beliefs as superstition, they also carry practical benefits. They regulate hunting pressure, prevent waste, and encourage cooperation. They keep people cautious, which in a world without hospitals is its own kind of survival strategy. You don't question the rituals because you can't afford to. In a life this precarious, anything that promises an edge is worth keeping. And so, without realizing it, you've internalized the idea that hunting isn't just skill and luck, it's a performance staged for an audience you'll never see. But who can make or break your next meal? Which brings us to another truth you can't escape. The fact that while you're out here asking unseen forces for permission to live, other human beings might be deciding whether or not they're going to let you keep breathing. If the landscape doesn't kill you, and the predators don't kill you, and hunger doesn't finish the job, there's still one wild card left: other humans, which depending on the season, might be worse. The idea that prehistoric life was some idyllic pan-human commune is a fantasy invented by people who have never fought over the last piece of bread, let alone the last watering hole. You share a planet with other bands of hunters, and while some are distant enough to stay theoretical, others occupy the same migration corridors, the same berry patches, the same salt licks where animals gather. And when resources tighten, the polite fiction of everyone gets along evaporates. Most encounters are cautious at first. You spot them from a distance, a column of figures moving against the horizon, or smoke rising from a camp you didn't build. Both sides assess numbers, weapons, body language. You might approach to trade, stone for hide, sinew for dried meat, but even then, hands stay close to weapons. Deals are made in the shadow of risk, but scarcity breeds aggression. If they've had a bad hunt, if their children are thin, if they think you've taken their herd or stripped their grove, negotiations shrink to one option: take it back. That can mean a raid at dawn, spears in the half-light, and a quick grab for whatever they can carry before you regroup. Sometimes it's not about resources at all. Sometimes it's about revenge. Someone insulted someone else months ago, or a fight broke out over marriage arrangements, or a previous raid left a blood debt. Memory in small groups is long and personal, and feuds can stretch across seasons. The danger isn't just in open combat. It's in ambushes while traveling, in arrows or spears thrown from cover, in traps laid on a trail you thought was safe. There's no such thing as a neutral zone. Anywhere you walk could be claimed by someone else, even if you've walked it a dozen times before. The stakes are total. Losing a fight doesn't just mean losing possessions. It can mean losing members of your group to death or abduction. It can mean your food supply is gone, your tools taken, your shelter burned. It can force you into dangerous migrations during the worst season, when the land is least forgiving. and the line between friend and enemy is thin. A group you traded with last year might decide to attack you this year, simply because their situation has changed. Likewise, today's enemy could be tomorrow's ally if the right deal is struck. Trust is provisional, temporary, and always weighed against the possibility that you're being set up. You learn quickly that vigilance is a survival skill. Scouts range ahead, not just to track animals but to watch for human signs, footprints too fresh to ignore, broken branches where no animal would walk, the faint smell of smoke from a cooking fire. Everyone knows the drill. If the signs are too close, you either prepare to defend what's yours or quietly vanish before anyone spots you. And this is the constant backdrop to your life. You're not just hunting animals. You're competing with people who have the same needs and fewer reasons to be merciful when their own survival is on the line, which makes you appreciate your group all the more, because without them, you're not just alone, you're already dead. If you somehow make it through the predators, the hunger, the injuries, the bad winters, and the occasional spear thrown by a stranger with poor impulse control, you get the dubious privilege of thinking about the future. Not your future, that's a coin toss every single morning, but the future of the group. Everything you know is stored in your head and the heads of those around you. There are no books, no maps, no training manuals. The closest thing you have to a library is an elder who's still coherent enough to tell you which plant will heal a wound and which will kill you before the sun sets. Every skill you've learned: how to knap flint without cutting your own hand open, how to follow tracks through shifting wind, how to store nuts so they don't mold, has to be passed on directly, by showing, repeating, and hoping the next person actually pays attention. And here's the precarious part: if you die without passing it on, that knowledge dies too. A bad hunting season, a raid, or a sudden illness can erase generations of hard-won experience. If no one remembers where the spring runs clear after the dry season, that spring might as well not exist. If no one knows the right time to follow the herds across the river, the group might arrive to find nothing but trampled mud. The tools themselves don't tell the whole story. Sure, a spear can outlive its maker, but without the technique behind it, the specific way to throw it at a certain animal in a certain wind, it's just a stick with ambition. Same with stone blades. The difference between a knife that can butcher a carcass cleanly and one that just smears the meat into unusable strips is all in the knowledge of the hands shaping it. Even the routes you walk are part of this legacy. Trails to seasonal food sources, to shelter from storms, to water that doesn't run dry. They're as much inheritance as any modern title deed, and they're fragile. A single season of bad luck can scatter a group, breaking the chain of memory. When that happens, the land stays the same, but the knowledge of how to live in it is gone. There's no permanence here, no guarantee your group's name, if it even has one, will be remembered beyond a few generations. You leave no monuments but fire ash, no written laws but the patterns of how you move and share. What survives of you is only what gets carried forward in the skills, stories, and habits of those still walking. And maybe that's the quiet truth you don't say out loud. Survival here isn't just about your own heartbeat. It's about making sure the people after you can still find the next meal, the next safe campsite, the next reason to keep going. Because if they can't, then you weren't just unlucky, you were the last chapter in a story no one will be around to finish. In the long, slow dawn of the human story, there was a practical inconvenience no myth ever really admitted. Our ancestors were poorly equipped to kill anything worth eating. No claws, no fangs, no armor, only a skull prone to sunburn and a pair of feet, good for running but not exactly for pouncing. And yet, there was the stomach, forever lobbying for more than roots and the occasional unlucky bird. Early hominins had to accept a humbling truth. They weren't the lions of the savannah, but the scavengers who arrived late to the feast, sniffing around for leftovers and opportunities. The fossil record still tells on them cracked bones with the telltale percussion marks of stone tools, suggesting they often settled for marrow after some other predator had already done the glamorous work. But the absence of weapons didn't mean the absence of strategy. What these people lacked in brute force, they compensated for in stubbornness and nerve. They studied the habits of faster, stronger animals with the kind of obsessive focus normally reserved for rivals, learning not only when they hunted but when they slept, when they strayed from the herd, and most usefully, when they dropped their guard. It was a survival game where the how mattered more than the what. and that how sometimes meant exploiting the quirks of physiology. Large game animals, built for bursts of speed, overheated if pushed too long in the midday sun. This flaw, barely noticed by other predators, was the seed of a method that would turn the open plains into something like a long, dry arena. The idea sounds almost insulting to the prey. Catch it not by force, but by simply refusing to stop. Persistence hunting is the kind of slow cruelty only possible with a human body, lungs that can keep drawing breath while moving, sweat glands that keep the skin cool long after the sprint is over, and legs that trade speed for a sort of awkward, stubborn endurance. The method thrived in open, sun-bleached landscapes, where shade was a rumor and water a gamble. A hunter, or more often a small group, would follow an antelope, zebra, or kudu at a steady pace, forcing it to flee in short, panicked bursts. Each time it stopped to catch its breath, the humans closed the gap. Each time it tried to shake them with another dash, its body temperature climbed closer to a fatal point. Archaeologists and anthropologists suspect this wasn't just a Paleolithic experiment. It lingers in living memory through accounts of Kalahari hunter-gatherers who could shadow an animal for hours, tracking the faint scuff of hooves and the way grass bent under its passage. The hunt might end not with a spear thrust, but with the prey stumbling and collapsing, heat-drunk and trembling, unable to stand. There's a grim intimacy in it, the hunter watching the animal's strength bleed away under the sun, knowing the kill will be almost ceremonial by the time it comes. And yet, persistence hunting was never guaranteed. Wind could shift and hide the trail. Clouds could move in, cooling the air, giving the animal another hour of fight. Which is why other methods developed, ones that didn't require such a punishing investment of time and energy. Methods where the environment itself was persuaded to do the killing. Some landscapes conspired with the hunters, offering them edges sharper than any stone tool. Wetlands, floodplains, and shallow river crossings became arenas where weight, panic, and poor swimming technique could be turned into a kill. The strategy was simple enough in principle. Drive an animal into water it couldn't escape from, then let fatigue, mud, or the current finish the job. In places like the ancient Nile marshes or the seasonal swamps of the Amazon, this could mean a coordinated push from several directions, the hunters spreading out like a net made of bodies. Hooves slipped on slick clay, and heavy animals found themselves chest-deep in silt, each attempt to lunge forward dragging them deeper. Smaller prey might be forced into eddies or narrow channels, where one strong pair of hands could grip and pull them under. Some indigenous fishing-hunting traditions blurred the line between the two, using bare hands to hold a deer's snout underwater until the thrashing slowed, or coaxing whole flocks of waterfowl into reed-filled pockets from which they couldn't take off. And in colder regions, hunters learned the cruel efficiency of breaking ice around a crossing, leaving a thin crust to give way under the weight of a migrating caribou. The trick, of course, was timing. Rivers and lakes could be allies one day, and merciless enemies the next. Too much current, and the prey would be swept beyond reach. Too little, and it would simply wade out again, shivering but alive. This is why, in many societies, the most reliable tactic didn't involve water or exhaustion at all, but the simple and dangerous art of turning the entire landscape into a trap without ever building one. Before pits were dug and snares were knotted, hunters found ways to weaponize geography itself. A cliff, a narrow ravine, even a stand of dense thornbush could become a killing ground if the herd could be persuaded to run in the right direction. The persuasion, however, was rarely gentle. In the grasslands of North America, for example, bison jumps were orchestrated with an almost military choreography. Dozens of people spread out in a great arc, shouting, waving branches, and creating the illusion of a wall of movement. The animals, already wired to flee rather than investigate, funneled into narrowing terrain until the earth simply disappeared beneath them. The same principle appears in archaeological evidence from Europe, where reindeer bones cluster at the base of rocky escarpments, and in Australia, where kangaroos were driven into natural choke points and finished off with stones. What's striking is the sheer cooperation it required. One inattentive participant could let the herd break through the human barrier, ending the hunt in a storm of hooves and dust. But when it worked, the return was immense. Meat, hides, sinew, all gathered in one violent moment. No craftsmanship was needed, no complex devices, just bodies, noise, and an intimate map of the terrain. But sometimes, The terrain offered no cliff, no thorn maze, no natural funnel. In those places, hunters turned to methods that relied not on fear or force, but on a quiet patience, the kind that could keep a person standing knee-deep in a cold stream for hours, waiting for the flick of a shadow under the surface. In clear, slow-moving water, the hand could be as deadly as any hook. The method was deceptively simple. Stand still long enough for the fish to forget you exist, then slip your fingers beneath its belly, and lift it into the air before it realizes the river is no longer holding it. The reality was less romantic. Hours of cold water creeping up the legs, every muscle locked in a stillness that made the joints ache, eyes straining to distinguish a shadow from a stone. In Britain, this was called tickling, coaxing a trout toward capture with a light brushing touch. In parts of the American South, it became noodling, the riskier practice of reaching into submerged holes and feeling for the muscular twitch of a catfish, then wrestling it out while avoiding the spines. Across the Pacific, some Pacific Islander communities learned to read the tiniest ripples, striking only when they knew the fish's exact orientation in the water. This wasn't hunting in the sense of a chase, but in the sense of absolute intimacy. The predator had to enter the prey's element, adapting to its rhythm and breathing through the weight of its silence. In that suspended moment, the fish might rest in the cupped palm as though the hand were just another smooth riverstone, until the sudden lunge upward broke the spell. It was patient work, and patience could feed a family, but patience alone wouldn't smoke out a rabbit, or dislodge a porcupine from a thicket, or convince a bird to abandon its safe perch. For that, humans learned to breathe life into one of the most ancient tools of control: fire. Fire was never just for warmth or cooking. It was a shepherd of movement, a way to make the air itself hostile. Hunters learned to set controlled burns in slow arcs, sending columns of smoke toward burrows, hollows, or brush so dense even a fox would think twice before entering. The prey, forced into the open, had only two choices: run toward the waiting hunters or choke in place. In Australia's Northern Territory, seasonal burning created a patchwork of fresh regrowth that drew wallabies into predictable spots, ambush points marked not by snares, but by human patience and the smell of ash. In the Americas, fire was used to herd deer toward open plains, where speed and stamina could finish the job. Even birds could be flushed from high branches by curling smoke, their wings struggling to find safe air. The danger was never abstract. Fire's cooperation had to be earned, its boundaries negotiated. A shift in wind could turn a tidy corral into a disaster that burned not just the prey's escape routes, but the hunter's own. And yet, the control of flame carried a certain authority. It made the hunter into a moving wall, one that could bend the landscape into a funnel, without ever laying a hand on the prey. But not every hunt was about cornering the animal directly. Sometimes the easiest way to eat was to let another predator do all the hard work, and then simply take the prize. Long before humans were feared as apex predators, they were feared as opportunists. Scavenging wasn't a desperate fallback, it was a strategy, one built on nerve, timing, and the kind of boldness that borders on recklessness. A lion, for example, could bring down an antelope with explosive force, but it couldn't guard its kill forever. Its cubs would whine, the vultures would circle, and somewhere beyond the tree line, a small knot of humans would be waiting for the right kind of distraction. Early Homo erectus left behind bone piles marked with both carnivore tooth scars and stone tool cut marks, suggesting a clear sequence. First the fangs, then the flint. In the Arctic, Inuit hunters were known to shadow polar bears, waiting for them to finish feeding on a seal before charging in with noise and numbers, driving the bear back long enough to slice off a share. Across East Africa, hyenas were the main rivals, and a night raid on a fresh kill might require little more than torches, shouting, and an understanding that you might run as fast as you came. This method came with an undeniable efficiency. No chase, no tracking, no need to exhaust the prey. But it also meant stepping into the teeth of something bigger, faster, and much less willing to negotiate. Those who survived often became the best at reading an animal's mood, knowing when hunger outweighed its territorial pride. Still, stealing from predators was reactive, dependent on luck and proximity. For those who wanted more control, there was another path, one that turned the hunter into something less visible, less human, and far more unsettling to the prey. Some hunts were won not with speed or strength, but with the unnerving ability to disappear in plain sight. A good stalker could stand 10 paces from a grazing animal and be nothing more than a lump of earth in its eyes. Camouflage was less about fancy patterns than about understanding how the prey saw the world, which colors dissolved into the background at dusk, which shadows broke up a human outline, which movements could be mistaken for wind or insects. In the grasslands, this meant crawling on elbows and knees, each shift of weight slowed to the point where minutes could pass before the next. In dense forests, it meant layering leaves, mud, and moss until the smell of human skin vanished under the scent of damp earth. Plains hunters sometimes draped themselves in animal hides, approaching within arm's reach while grazing, the living animal unable to tell the difference until it was too late. This kind of hunting required a patience that bordered on ascetic discipline. Blink too quickly, and a flash of white in the eye might give you away. Breathe at the wrong moment, and a shift in the air could betray your position. In some indigenous North American traditions, stalkers wore antelope heads, not just for disguise, but to mimic the subtle, reassuring motions of a feeding herd. It was a skill that lived in the small margins, in knowing exactly when the prey's attention flickered elsewhere, when the ambient noise was loud enough to mask a final step. And in the most hostile environments, where there was no tall grass to vanish into, no trees to hide behind, hunters had to rely on something even more extreme: the land's own frozen stillness. In the deep cold, hunting without tools meant understanding that movement itself was a luxury. The prey was adapted to survive on minimal fuel. The hunter had to be even more economical. In Arctic and subarctic traditions, seal hunting at breathing holes became an act of endurance, so absolute that the hunter might stand motionless for hours, face hidden under a hood, hands ready just beyond the rim of ice. The seal would surface for air, unsuspecting, and the hand, quick, firm, unshaking despite the cold, would close over the blowhole before the animal could dive. Caribou could be taken in similar stillness by learning their migration routes and waiting where deep snow slowed their steps. Hunters used snowdrifts as both camouflage and barricade, closing in at a pace dictated by the animal's labored breathing. In some accounts, wolves were tracked not to kill them, but to follow them to fresh kills, a snowy echo of the scavenger's method, but slower, riskier, and dependent on the thin light of winter. What the Arctic offered was not abundance, but predictability. Ice formed the same cracks, snow the same drifts, year after year, and hunters mapped these patterns as carefully as others might map the stars. Yet, in many of these cultures, the hunt was never purely about food. Taking an animal bare-handed, without the mediation of a weapon, carried a weight beyond survival. It was a demonstration of belonging, proof that the hunter understood the land's demands and could meet them without flinching. And in many places, this sense of proof became ritualized, turned into public trials of courage, endurance, and skill. Hunts where the kill was less important than the reputation it carved. In many societies, hunting without weapons or traps was less about filling the cooking pot and more about filling a role, proving to the community, and to oneself, that the body could meet danger without flinching. Among some plains tribes, young men were sent to bring back meat using only their hands or improvised tools, the challenge designed to strip away any illusion of safety. In the Amazon, unarmed hunts could mark the passage from adolescence to adulthood, the animal's death serving as both sustenance and symbol. The risk was not ornamental. A misjudged lunge at a wild boar or a poorly timed approach to a crocodile could end a life as quickly as it could win honor. This uncertainty was the point. It mirrored the cosmology of many animist traditions, where the taking of life was an exchange, the prey offering itself if, and only if, the hunter demonstrated worthiness. That worthiness was measured not in the sharpness of tools, but in the depth of skill, patience, and nerve. These hunts were sometimes witnessed, their outcomes recounted for seasons afterward. Success meant status, stories, and a kind of quiet power. Failure could be softened only if the attempt itself was seen as valiant. In some Arctic communities, bare-handed seal captures became the stuff of song, each retelling adding to the hunter's shadow in the collective memory. Elsewhere, the ritual aspect blurred with spectacle. Feats meant to impress allies, intimidate rivals, or honor spirits who watched from the margins of the hunt. In this way, hunting without weapons was never truly without tools. The tool was the body, trained, disguised, and hardened by landscapes that gave nothing freely. And long before the first spear was thrown, it was this body, in all its fragile ingenuity, that learned to stand where tooth and claw ruled, and somehow to leave with meat. In some corners of the world, the line between play and survival training has always been suspiciously thin. Among the Ewenki of Siberia, children once learned to tie sled harnesses with fingers already numbed by cold, not because there weren't warmer days ahead, but because the cold was the most reliable teacher. In the deserts of the Sahel, it wasn't unusual for a child to be sent to fetch water from a well far beyond the village, not a gentle errand, but a deliberate march under an unforgiving sun, the kind of task that thinned out weakness without anyone calling it by that name. The elders weren't cruel for the sport of it, at least not in their own reckoning. They understood that the land kept no patience for hesitation, and that the sooner a child learned the rhythm of its demands, the slimmer the chances of watching that child collapse years later in a storm or famine. The Arctic had its own syllabus, making the smallest members of the family carry armfuls of firewood through the wind, or learn to find a snow-sheltered spot for rest without a word of instruction. In such places, comfort wasn't the default but an interruption, and children grew into its absence, like saplings twisting into the wind. The pattern was predictable. Give the child a task beyond their current strength, offer little guidance, and let the environment do the rest. A bitter wind in the lungs, a blister rising on the heel, a mouth dry from holding back the last swallow. These were considered more convincing than any lecture. It wasn't about punishing the young. It was about ensuring they were worth the trouble of keeping alive. And so, small hands gripped rough tools, bare feet crossed sharp ground, and eyes learned to watch the horizon, not for beauty, but for warning. And yet, for some elders, survival wasn't just about enduring the elements. It was about carrying your people's mark on your very skin. In many societies, a child's body was never considered a blank page for long. Among the Nuba in Sudan, a girl's first fine lattice of cuts along her abdomen wasn't a decoration in the sense outsiders imagined. It was a statement that she belonged, a visible stamp of the tribe's authorship. In parts of Papua New Guinea, young boys were led into smoky huts where sharpened bamboo would raise welts across their backs and shoulders, each cut pressed with ash so the scars would stand out like permanent shadows. It wasn't art for its own sake. Every mark was an archive, each line telling someone exactly who your people were, which ancestors claimed you, and what ordeals you had endured. It was, quite literally, identity you could not remove. Among the Dinka, a boy's forehead could be scored with 6 parallel lines before he was tall enough to look his initiator in the eye, the deep grooves becoming both ornament and lifelong introduction. For some, the pain itself was part of the inscription, a test of silence, of holding still while the hot blade or thorn did its work. Piercing followed the same logic. The himba might fit a child with an anklet or armlet, so tight it bit into the skin. The wound and the metal together, forming a lesson in endurance. Across the Pacific, young girls were given their first ear piercings during festivals. The blood caught in palm leaves and discarded into the sea, a quiet reminder that the body was as much a vessel for ritual as it was for living in. These marks were never private. They were meant for the gaze of others, a visible curriculum of suffering and belonging. And when the skin had been written on, the next lesson often went inward, teaching the stomach to tolerate absence, and the throat to quiet its thirst. In places where the earth's generosity came in unpredictable bursts, children were taught early that an empty stomach was not a crisis but a condition. Among the Hadza of Tanzania, a child might be sent to gather tubers with no guarantee of finding any. The walk itself as important as the meal that might never come. In parts of the Kalahari, the San would lead the young to dig for water-bearing roots, not because there was no water at the camp, but because learning to coax it from stubborn ground meant never begging for it later. The lesson was subtle and relentless. You don't feed a child at every whimper. In the Andes, Quechua communities still recall the old practice of sending boys into the high pastures with the herds for days, equipped with nothing but a sling, a knife, and a few mouthfuls of maize. The hunger was deliberate, an appetite sharpened until they learned which wild leaves dulled it, which streams ran clean, and which were best left untouched. In the Sahel, thirst was stretched out until the tongue felt like paper and the skin grew tight, only to be relieved with a measured sip, never the indulgence of a full gourd. These were not punishments in the sense of retribution. They were inoculations against desperation, rehearsals for droughts and lean seasons that would one day make no allowances for softness. Elders understood that the body could be trained like leather, stiff at first, then supple, until it could bend without breaking. And just as the gut could be taught to endure emptiness, the hands could be taught to meet danger before they could even write their own name. In many traditions, the sequence was simple. A child learned to hold a spear before they could sign their name, if writing was even a concern at all. Among the Maasai boys were handed miniature spears as soon as they could walk steadily, their games consisting of jabbing at targets or chasing stray goats back into the fold. In the New Guinea highlands, slings and small bows were the first toys, except they weren't toys. The stones could kill small birds, the arrows could pierce skin, and the lessons left no room for mistaking them as harmless. The elders understood that weapons were more than tools. They were extensions of the body's intent. A child who could send a spear straight through a banana trunk was not just playing, they were rehearsing for hunts, for raids, for defending a village when the shadows in the grass weren't wind. In Arctic communities, even small hands were fitted to ivory-tipped harpoons, the child learning to throw with the precision needed to hit the breathing hole of a seal before the animal slipped away under the ice. Sometimes the weapon came with no explanation at all. The child had to watch, imitate, fail, and try again until the movement was as natural as breathing. The risk was part of the education. A small cut from a knife, a bruised shoulder from a bowstring, a burn from handling hot metal too soon. These were the quiet, blood-inked footnotes of mastery. And once the body understood the mechanics of harm, the elders turned to a different form of instruction, one that used pain not to kill, but to remember. In many traditions, the sequence was simple. A child learned to hold a spear before they could sign their name, if writing was even a concern at all. Among the Maasai boys were handed miniature spears as soon as they could walk steadily, their games consisting of jabbing at targets or chasing stray goats back into the fold. In the New Guinea highlands, slings and small bows were the first toys, except they weren't toys. The stones could kill small birds, the arrows could pierce skin, and the lessons left no room for mistaking them as harmless. The elders understood that weapons were more than tools. They were extensions of the body's intent. A child who could send a spear straight through a banana trunk was not just playing, they were rehearsing for hunts, for raids, for defending a village when the shadows in the grass weren't wind. In Arctic communities, even small hands were fitted to ivory-tipped harpoons, the child learning to throw with the precision needed to hit the breathing hole of a seal before the animal slipped away under the ice. Sometimes the weapon came with no explanation at all. The child had to watch, imitate, fail, and try again until the movement was as natural as breathing. The risk was part of the education. A small cut from a knife, a bruised shoulder from a bowstring, a burn from handling hot metal too soon. These were the quiet, blood-inked footnotes of mastery. And once the body understood the mechanics of harm, the elders turned to a different form of instruction, one that used pain not to kill, but to remember. In certain traditions, forgetting wasn't an option, not because elders repeated themselves, but because they ensured the body remembered for you. Among some pastoralist groups in East Africa, a child who broke a serious taboo might have a thin branch snapped against the inside of the arm. The sting renewed each time the rule was mentioned, until the two were inseparable. In parts of Polynesia, moral lessons could be tied to tattooing, a first transgression marked with a small, deliberate prick of pigment that flared under salt water, embedding both the rule and the ache. Pain had a way of anchoring knowledge deeper than any spoken warning. Among the Ibon of Borneo, boys learning to weave traps were sometimes made to test them with their own fingers, feeling the snap so they would never forget the proper angle. In rural Japan's past, young apprentices in certain trades were taught not to mishandle hot tools by being accidentally brushed with them once, a fleeting burn that cured carelessness for life. This was not punishment in the modern sense. It was an investment, a brief injury traded for years of precision and obedience. The wound was small, but it made the lesson inescapable. And just as pain could etch caution into muscle and mind, elders knew there was another teacher far older and colder, the presence of death itself. In some cultures, the dead were never hidden away from the young. Among the Toraja of Sulawesi, children could share a house with preserved relatives. their waxed faces watching from a corner until the next funeral season. The lesson wasn't morbid curiosity, it was familiarity, a quiet apprenticeship in mortality. In rural Madagascar, during Famadahana, bones of the dead were unwrapped, reclothed, and danced with. Children carried them as easily as they might carry a sibling. Death, in this sense, wasn't a stranger who burst in uninvited, it was the old family friend you always had to make room for. In Arctic communities, sleeping beside a freshly killed seal or reindeer was more than warmth. It was a child's first understanding of the exchange between life and survival. In parts of West Africa, boys training as hunters might spend the night beside the carcass of their first kill, the air heavy with the smell of blood, to remind them what their hands were capable of bringing down. The stillness of death was expected to seep into their bones, replacing fear with recognition. Some were taken further. A child might help wash the body of an elder, comb their hair, close their eyes. In doing so, they learned the boundaries of care didn't end at breathing. It stripped away the panic of first encounters with loss and replaced it with something colder, steadier. And once they could face the stillness without flinching, the elders would remove the comfort of company altogether, setting them alone to face the dark. Isolation, in the hands of elders, was never about rest. In parts of Aboriginal Australia, boys undergoing initiation were sent to live apart from the community, sometimes for weeks, their only company the unbroken horizon and the weight of ritual restrictions. Among the Sami, a youth learning to herd reindeer might be stationed alone in a distant grazing ground, the cold and silence pressing in until his thoughts were louder than the wind. The separation served many purposes: to strip away dependence, to force the mind into the shape of its own survival. Among the Apache, a girl's puberty rites could include seclusion in a darkened space. Her food passed to her quietly, her voice withheld from the world outside. In West African coming-of-age traditions, children might be sent into the forest with nothing but a small blade, told to return only when they had completed a set of unseen tasks. Loneliness was not considered harm, it was seasoning. It taught that fear could expand to fill all space, and that mastering it meant shrinking it down until it could be carried in a pocket. And when the child returned, thinner, quieter, more deliberate in movement, the elders did not embrace them with comfort. They welcomed them with stories, the kind that struck like a stone dropped into still water. In many places, the night belonged to stories, and not the gentle kind that coaxed sleep. Among the Innu of northern Japan, elders told of the kami spirits who stole away careless children, their claws as quick as the wind in the pines. In parts of the Amazon, fireside tales described forest beings that hid in silence until you stopped to drink, then swallowed you whole. These weren't metaphors, at least not in the ears of the young. They were maps of invisible dangers, drawn in the shapes of teeth and shadow. The telling itself could be a performance of fear. In the highlands of Ethiopia, some grandparents would pause mid-sentence, staring into the dark, as if the thing they spoke of might arrive before the story ended. In the Arctic, tales of the Kalupalut, child-snatching beings lurking under the ice, were delivered just before trips to fetch water, ensuring small hands never wandered too close to thin patches. The stories carved caution into memory without a single blow. There was always a purpose: to bind moral lessons to the spine with strands of dread. Laziness was punished by spirits that withered your limbs, disobedience by ancestors who called you into the earth. Even humor had a sting: trickster tales that left their victims humiliated, their suffering a warning dressed as entertainment. And when the imagination had been sharpened to a fearful edge, the next step was to give the child a real target, one that bled when struck. The transition from stories of danger to the practice of it was rarely soft. Among the Yanomami, boys might first be allowed to hunt small birds or monkeys, not for sport, but to prove their hand was steady and they were unshaken by the sight of blood. In Mongolia's steppes, children learned to slit a sheep's throat with a single, deficient cut, the lesson repeated until their movements were as smooth as their elders. Violence was framed as skill, a necessary craft. In the Pacific Islands, young boys training for warriorhood were matched against older peers in mock battles, where bruises were not accidents but credentials. In medieval Europe's peasant communities, the first kill for a boy learning to hunt was often followed by the responsibility of butchering the animal himself, a trial of stomach as much as muscle. The elders stood nearby, correcting the angle of the knife, noting who flinched and who didn't. Even girls, in certain societies, were drawn into this apprenticeship. In some nomadic herding cultures, they were taught to castrate livestock before adolescence, the task demanding precision and nerve. These lessons wrapped cruelty in necessity, binding the young to the rhythms of life and death that sustained the community. And once the body had been tested with real harm dealt to another, there remained one more arena to harden: the public stage, where mistakes would be remembered long after the bruise had faded. In many traditions, shame was not a private matter, it was a public resource. Among the Igbo of Nigeria, a child who failed at a task might be paraded before the village in exaggerated mimicry, older children reenacting the mistake until laughter dissolved any hope of dignity. In rural Java, a lazy youth might be made to wear absurd, mismatched clothes to the market, the humiliation lasting just long enough to ensure it never had to be repeated. This wasn't cruelty for entertainment, though the onlookers rarely hid their amusement. It was a way of armoring the young against the sharp edges of community life. Among the Inuit, a child who lied might have their misdeed turned into a song, performed in front of everyone, ensuring they'd never forget the sound of their own folly. In some parts of the Balkans, a young shepherd who lost an animal might be fitted with a wooden yoke and made to graze like the herd, a punishment that ended in laughter but carried a weight no beating could match. These rites of humiliation stripped away the fear of being seen at one's worst, replacing it with the resilience to stand, endure the gaze, and keep moving. By the time a child had been weathered by endurance, marked in flesh, taught hunger, armed with weapons, burned by lessons, steeped in death, tempered in solitude, haunted by stories, blooded in violence, and hardened under the public eye, the elders could finally step back. Their work was done. The next generation had been carved into shape, as they themselves once had been, by hands both guiding and unyielding, shaping survival out of childhood.